A couple things super quick. I have a Patreon where I make exclusive videos every other month. We've got stuff on American Psycho, Sabrina Carpenter, and Baby Girl, a video comparing all the versions of Wuthering Heights, and up next I'm going to do an Oscars video where I talk about my thoughts on the ceremony and the films for this year and do some picks and predictions and all that jazz. You and I both get a lot out of it when you subscribe, so go check it out. I also wrote a book about Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. I'm very proud of it, and you can get it at the link in the description, or really most places that you get books. Thank you so much. Let's move on. A few months ago, British Vogue published an article called "Is Having a Boyfriend Embarrassing?" The article was quite the sensation in online feminist circles, where women near and far praised it for speaking truth to a growing frustration with the men they were dating. Men who were lazy, adulterous, infantile, and in some instances, abusive. Men who, apparently up until now, gave the women they were dating a certain cachet. That is, until Vogue came out and called the affliction of dating men what it really was: embarrassing. Aside from those who dismissed the article as rage bait, and those who were in fact rage baited, there were some who provided some more thoughtful criticism as well, like Emily Crane on Instagram or Hasif Ali on Substack, both of whom criticized the article for framing heterosexual partnership as part of one's overall brand, rather than as a real human relationship. But their comment sections quickly derided them, stating that they simply didn't understand the article, with some even accusing them of having not read it at all. What Crane and Hasif failed to understand, according to this commenter on Substack at least, was this. The piece is speaking to a particular kind of fatigue that a lot of women are feeling, not with romance itself, but with men and what they've come to represent in our cultural moment. It's less about independence versus dependence, and more about safety, politics, and power dynamics. When we talk about embarrassment here, it's not embarrassment over being loved or cared for, it's discomfort with being seen as aligned with men in a time when patriarchy, red pill culture, and gender-based violence are so visible and normalized. This was a sentiment espoused quite a bit in the discourse around the article, and so, with their criticism, Crane and Ali had apparently forsaken this rallying cry, and thus they were cast off by their comment sections as anti-feminist. In the aforementioned comment, this person alludes to something many people have invoked in this boyfriend embarrassing discourse, which is 4B, a fringe movement in South Korea where women have opted altogether out of sex, dating, marriage, and reproduction with men. 4B was born from a particularly patriarchal national and cultural context. South Korea has high incidences of domestic violence, femicide, and revenge porn, and its president infamously blamed feminism for the country's low birth rate. Hop over to the US, where Roe v. Wade was overturned just a few years ago, and you'll find a public health emergency that has disproportionately impacted America's most vulnerable populations. In one heartbreaking case, a young mother named Gisele Barnica died after doctors delayed emergency miscarriage care. Despite wanting to terminate the pregnancy to prevent infection, her medical team told her it would be a crime, and they couldn't act until the fetal heartbeat had stopped. She died of sepsis with retained products of conception 2 days after finally delivering. Barnica is one of 2 pregnant Texas women who has died after doctors delayed critical care. Meanwhile, out on the streets, internet-addled young men have taken to wearing t-shirts reading, "Your body, my choice." In the wake of this horrifying reality, it's not hard to see why 4B would resonate in the West. But the 4B movement is not just a total opting out of dating men, but an opting out of all the signifiers of femininity as well. The early years of the movement coincided with the Escape the Corset campaign, where teenage girls cut their hair short and destroyed their makeup to protest South Korea's restrictive beauty standards. In Korea, which is the world's 10th largest beauty market, this anti-consumerist behavior pushed up against not just the culture, but the economy as well. For many members of the 4B movement, the 4 no's was not just a lifestyle choice, it was a labor strike. In a country with one of the lowest birth rates, to forgo emotional, sexual, and financial relations with men was not just a rejection of patriarchy, but a rejection of a capitalist patriarchal regime. The movement is, in other words, anti-capitalist. When people accused Crane and Ali for failing to properly read the article, I was confused, because I had also read the article and saw nothing of 4B or a call to organize. In fact, rearing its ugly head between the lines of that article was capitalism itself wearing a feminist mask. The article was penned by a writer named Chante Joseph, who deserves grace for the fact that journalists are now beholden to limited word counts and clickbait headlines, and it's likely she wasn't able to say all she wanted to say within those constraints. More on that later. So in this video, I'm just going to try and refer to the piece as the Vogue article wherever I can. I mean, after all, the medium is the message. The Vogue article does not exist in a vacuum. In fact, it belongs to a broader trend on social media, especially on TikTok, of women placing feminism at the front lines of a gendered, hetero-fatalist dating war, which itself belongs to an even broader trend of TikTok feminism being the loudest and perhaps most effective agent of patriarchal capitalism, at least for women. Strip talks of women dumping money on the floor and encouraging their fellow women to hustle harder, girl dinner and girl math for the proud bimbo contingents of the internet, videos of women telling other women not to have babies because pregnancy will make your nose bigger. TikTok has become one of the foremost platforms for contemporary feminism, yet often it seems that whenever the word feminist is used in these spaces, it's used in service of a capitalist project that wants to keep us all distracted, self-conscious, and alone. If you read the Vogue article and it resonated with you, you're probably writing an essay of your very own in the comments down below. You're probably wondering why on earth I'm using something so beloved as the primary example in an attack on all the things that we, at least in this circle, are already critical of. Girl dinners, girls, whatever. And all I have to say is, hear me out. Second wave feminism, that is, the feminism of the 60s and 70s and a bit in the 80s, was the kind of feminism your dad or granddad might recall with fear in their eyes. Burn your bra, political lesbian, heady armpit, frigid Marxist, the lot of them. But where the first wave broke ground in women's enfranchisement, the second wave got a lot done in the way of women entering the workforce en masse, as well as in the way of sexual rights, albeit mostly for white women, as women of color had been in the workforce that whole time. But as the 80s came around and Reagan came on the scene, hellbent on the nuclear family and hating anyone who couldn't fit into that, a massive reactionary movement arose that sought to shave the armpit hair right off those pesky lesbians, as discussed by Susan Faludi in her seminal book, Backlash. In Backlash, Faludi draws from a number of examples of popular refrain in 80s media, which held that the second wave had culminated in a woman who was a depraved, soulless, single-career banshee, distilled most perfectly into the psychopathic, man-killing character of Alex Forrest in Fatal Attraction.
I'm not going to be ignored, Dan.
Most compelling about this backlash, says Faludi, was this. A backlash against women's rights succeeds to the degree that it appears not to be political, that it appears not to be a struggle at all. It is most powerful when it goes private, when it lodges inside a woman's mind and turns her vision inward until she imagines the pressure is all in her head, until she begins to enforce the backlash too on herself. Out of this covert messaging in popular media came post-feminism, the ill-defined philosophy which purported quite prematurely and conveniently that equality between the genders had been achieved, and now that women had it all, the job, sometimes even the guy, all they needed was clothes, and shoes, and makeup, and a really killer workout regimen. And a diet, like a really killer diet. This gave woman the illusion of choice, that she chose to embrace her own sexiness and femininity and housewifery. In the early 90s, though, there was a glimmer of hope that came in the form of a girl named Kathleen Hanna and her friends Kathy Wilcox, Billy Karen, and Toby Vale, who comprised the band Bikini Kill. Bikini Kill were the poster children of an emerging scene in the Pacific Northwest called Riot Girls, a feminist rock movement that operated on the ethos of two seemingly contradictory words, girl power. In her recent book, Girl on Girl, How Popular Culture Turned a Generation of Women Against Themselves, Atlantic writer Sophie Gilbert examines the Riot Grrrl era as being extremely and intentionally political. For Gilbert, the Riot Grrrls used punk as a venue for young women's frustrations with the socially imposed limitations of their gender, which existed even within the punk scene itself. Their diary-esque texts had a distinctly radical edge. For example, the flyers at shows often had explicitly political imperatives on them, like, "The revolution starts here, plus now within each one of us," and "Resist the internalization of capitalism, the reducing of people and oneself to commodities meant to be consumed." Riot Grrrl, with its anti-capitalist messaging and fringe musicians, had a clear impact, but it was not commercially viable. So what came on its heels was a musical act that took all the aesthetics and slogans of Riot Grrrl and watered them down for mass appeal. That was the Spice Girls. The Spice Girls were developed by a father-son record label called Heart Management, who wanted to compete with the boy band craze in the UK. Their girls were organized into vague personality types like baby and sporty, danced, sung, and wantonly threw stuff on the ground and spun round and around and repeated over and over again the phrase,
"Girl power, this is not about picking up guys, this is about girl power."
But girl power did not mean sexual or financial or cultural liberation. It meant something else entirely. In Gilbert's words, the Riot Grrrl movement wanted women to have freedom from sexual violence, abuse, injustice, fear. The Spice Girls embodied freedom to have fun, earn money, pursue pleasure. There are no prizes for deducing which ideology was easier to package and sell. Riot Grrrls belong to what is referred to as third-wave feminism, but it too was ill-fated when another backlash movement began. As the shame of sexual impropriety was shunted onto young women like Monica Lewinsky and Pamela Anderson in massive public sex scandals, it became clear that culture had somehow gotten even meaner towards women. Like, a lot. And with the shuttering of the all-female Lilith Fair Festival in 1999, after 3 years of public ridicule, and the show that was Woodstock 99, where male rock bands dominated the night and women in the audience were gang raped, feminism, as the Riot Grrrls knew it, was on its way out. Gilbert observes that in this short time, an abrupt but pivotal shift had taken place in pop culture, which signaled feminism's end. The women of rock and roll were replaced by younger, less opinionated, heavily scrutinized, hypersexualized pop stars. Think Britney, Christina, Jessica. Most baffling of all, the solo act girl who is both aware of and naive to her own sexuality, who sings songs by record labels in sold-out stadiums, and who sells lots and lots of merch, was marketed towards young women. Gilbert concludes, the spirit of camaraderie and collaboration that Lilith had embodied was also fundamentally at odds with the individualistic, sound-bitey essence of Girl Power 2.0. Obviously, any message of empowerment and even girl power was snuffed out in the 2000s with the relentless harassment and humiliation of these female idols by the media. When Britney shaved her head in a moment of defiance, a desperate display of her own agency, it went right over the heads of everyone else, and she was quickly removed from the public eye only to re-emerge as a simulacrum of her former self, as we know. But in the late aughts and early 2010s, girl power slowly popped up again in pop culture, and this time it had turned inward. Or at least it took on an inward appearance. One way this happened was with the rise of a new kind of pop idol who was a bit more mature, self-assured, and world-weary. Sensations like Lady Gaga and Beyoncé became the new symbols of pop feminism, making hit songs about the ability to overcome, and perhaps more presciently, the ability to turn a profit from their resiliency. In Resilience and Melancholy, Pop Music Feminism Neoliberalism, Robin James takes the examples of these two artists to explore pop culture's fixation on the concept of resilience, this idea of bouncing back and even thriving from any obstacle, prejudice, or inequity one might experience. Now, this is a complicated subject, and I am not criticizing either of these artists for being anti-feminist or something, but as two of the most successful artists of the 2010s, their career trajectories and branding offer an interesting perspective on the neoliberal feminist subject in the 21st century. For James, resilience is the dominant form of neoliberal feminism. The ability to absorb damage and rise above it is embodied for James in pop stars like Lady Gaga or Beyoncé, whose star power and image have relied upon their ability to triumph over patriarchal strategies and expectations, or in the case of Lady Gaga, the appropriation of goth culture, quote, as a medium in which she demonstrates her overcoming of her own damage. Now, the issue with resilience culture, as James points out, is that resilience reduces the political to the individual. It transforms the problems of social inequity into issues of private agency and ability, or as Susan Faludi put it earlier in this essay, it turns her vision inward until she imagines the pressure is all in her head, until she begins to enforce the backlash too on herself. Now, perhaps most disturbingly in James's analysis is the notion that resilience not only privatizes collective suffering into a problem of personal overcoming, but that it repackages said trauma into aesthetic surplus value. In reference to Marx, James calls resilience the new means of production in neoliberal society, in which crisis is the material that enables the individuals to bounce back from injury and crisis in a way that capitalizes on deficits so that you end up ahead of where you initially started. If this sounds familiar, perhaps that's because lean in and girl boss feminism have roots in this rhetoric. If you're still not convinced, think about Lemonade, Beyoncé's powerhouse album released in 2016. That was essentially a musical expression of all the damage that had been inflicted on the singer throughout her life and career. At the time, it was taken as a powerful allegory for the Black experience in America, particularly the Black female experience, said Beyoncé in her acceptance speech for Best Urban Contemporary Album at the 2017 Grammys.
Was to create a body of work that would give a voice to our pain, our struggles, our darkness, and our history.
In this speech, Beyoncé is referencing the continued struggle for basic civic rights and freedoms for Black people in the United States. She's putting to light the inequities of representation for Black Americans and the hidden injuries and injustices that continue to plague the country's civic and cultural systems. And yet, there was a deeper layer to the pain that Lemonade was attempting to convey. Beyoncé's husband Jay-Z was widely believed at the time to have cheated on her. Lemonade, in all its fury, was understood to be her vengeance. And yet the album was exclusively released on Tidal, which Jay-Z bought in 2015 and of which Beyoncé is a partner. Jay-Z's suspected infidelity and Beyoncé's scorn generated 306 million streams in the first weeks, proving that marital problems can, if marketed correctly, be a highly profitable venture that ultimately stabilizes norms rather than disrupting them. The other way girl power took off again was in 2010 with Frozen, Disney's response to the decades-long charge that its movies with female protagonists always ended in marriage. In this movie, two estranged sisters, one who is socially ostracized and not interested in romance, and another who is seduced into an ill-fated engagement with a conniving man, end the movie reunited and single. Frozen was a cultural juggernaut on par with Spice Girls, honestly. I mean, to this day you can probably buy Olaf the Snowman branded spoons from your local dollar store. And much of this was due to its overt girl power messaging, that women could be freed from the chains of thinking about men and focus on, in the words of Miranda Hobbs,
what we think, we feel, we know, Christ.
But I think this 2016 paper about the evolution of the Disney princess inadvertently says a lot about what was also going on here. In it, Cole Riley outlines 4 generations of Disney women. The first, he says, are submissive trophies, those earliest ones who get married off. Second are sacrificial lambs and martyrs, the ones from the 90s Renaissance who sacrifice themselves for a man or their families. And then third, he calls exoticized ethnics, who are meant to define an entire non-Western culture. He then upholds the last generation, the Frozen one, Mighty Maidens Breaking Free, as the best one because it's the only one, Riley argues, where the women have any real agency. He writes, each of the 4th generation princesses embrace philosophies and attitudes that can seem downright modern when compared to their princess predecessors. Her choices are to be her own, not predetermined for her by kin, culture, or obedience to tradition. And while Riley, and to an extent Disney, are well-intentioned in their depiction of women as being independent and focused on their dreams, being transcendent rather than immanent as Simone de Beauvoir would have it, there's something really striking to me about Riley's posing of the woman against kin, culture, and tradition. It's as if this new woman, post-Britney, post-Lady Gaga, and solo act Beyoncé, post-Frozen, exists outside context and history altogether. There's a possibility that she, without kin or culture, entirely on her own, is the ultimate post-feminist subject. This was the era of going your own way, where a sort of triangulation was happening between girl power, resilience, and the individual. By the mid-2010s, the word feminist was no longer tainted. Actually, it was super lucrative. I mean, thanks to Maria Grazia Chiuri slapping "We should all be feminists" on a $300 t-shirt, it was impossible to avoid one of these in just about every store, high fashion or otherwise, for several years there. Beyonce was also using that same soundbite from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie and making millions off it. As bold, sans-serif phrases like feminist and girls flashed at us from every angle, it became apparent that imagery was far more powerful than action, at least to those making money. Iconic scholar Bell Hooks was also super critical of Beyonce's album Lemonade for invoking the word feminism while simultaneously upping the ante on her hypersexualization. She said that it was capitalist money-making at its best and actually accused Beyonce of being an agent of white supremacy. There's this talk that Hooks did at the New School, which was super controversial because she called Beyonce a terrorist in it, where she did predict something pretty important that was to come and that I think is super pertinent to this video.
Little caveat, but Hooks was doing a lot of hyperbole at this time that may have undermined the crux of what she was trying to say and wiped out a lot of nuance about who Beyonce is as an artist and an icon, both within and outside of the Black community. Beyonce has had a vast and complicated impact both artistically and culturally, and this does raise interesting questions about what happens when we ask artists, especially artists who are minorities, to be the perfect subject. But I also love Bell Hooks, and I think if we can look past the incendiary phrasing for a second, there is something really interesting in what she's saying. So here's the clip.
I mean, I actually feel like the major assault on feminism in our society has come from visual media and from television and videos. I mean, just think, the tirades against feminism occur so much in the image-making business. So I guess what I'm concerned about constantly in my critical imagination is, why is it that we don't have liberatory images that are away from, not an inversion of what society has told us, but that are our own sense of what am I looking like when I am free?
Running in tandem with feminist sloganeering was the rise of visual social media. Different from the social networking sites of the aughts, platforms like Instagram and Snapchat were more focused on the digital image. To be social was to post a photo of yourself or your surroundings and share it with the people you knew, and later the people you didn't. This is where we see the rise of figures like Kim Kardashian, the prototype of this era. Despite being hyper-sexed and having little tangible skills to show for, she was propped up by mainstream media as being a secret feminist icon, a strong, independent businesswoman who was able to make money outside of her relationship with Kanye West. Why? Well, Kim was credited for building an empire off the very concept of herself by seizing the potential of this new visual economy of social media, a visual economy which proved to be quite profitable to women because, as John Berger once put it, men act and women appear. From that visual social media economy came TikTok, an app that puts bite-sized videos onto a Darwinian algorithm where anyone's content can go viral and their lives changed forever. Lifting from the ultra-short-form interface of Vine, the goal of the aspiring TikTok celebrity is to grab people's attention as fast as possible. So here on the feminist side of TikTok, the mirror world to the influential far-right incel side of the app, decades of feminist theory and debate are being dumbed down and even mutated into attention-grabbing sound bites. On feminist TikTok, we get pink-hued, hazy, aesthetic videos flashing imagery from Pinterest and accompanied by Studio Ghibli scores with text overlays that read, "the female gaze" and "divine female energy." Advice videos from women recoiling at photos of the bodies of other women undergoing major physical changes during pregnancy, warning other women that pregnancy is a psyop designed by men. Quippy videos about prioritizing dogs over babies in public spaces, which means, of course, that mothers who can't afford childcare would have to stay home with baby. Videos calling out and sometimes even doxing men for poor dating behavior, declaring war on avoiders, gaslighters, and love bombers alike. videos of tiny cobbled-together plates of food with captions like "girl dinner," and women disproportionately weighing out their weekly expenditures to prioritize buying makeup and calling it "girl math." Videos of influencers sharing before and after images of their Turkish nose jobs and promising their followers not to gatekeep the surgeons who did it. Or perhaps most pervasive, videos that catch women in the background not performing the expected rituals of girl behavior, getting called out and often doxxed for being pick-me's. The most recent iteration of this are videos of people, most often women, dancing in public spaces unwittingly before a camera. Dancers behind DJs at boiler room sets, where viewers comb through their body language to determine whether their club-going behavior is up to code. Girls at middle school dances, trying too hard, or women at line dancing failing to be spatially conscious and thereby being classified as attention seekers. All of these examples have seedlings of feminism, right? Opposing the male gaze, educating women about the reality of pregnancy and thereby challenging this pro-natalist regime, making inside jokes about feminine culture, encouraging solidarity among women. But almost every time I see feminism invoked in these ways on TikTok, it's almost always perverted to ostracize and alienate other women, push a rigid standard of feminine behavior that neutralizes women's identities, and ultimately uphold the tenets of patriarcho-capitalism. And the wildest part is that, like Faludi predicted, patriarchal capitalism has become so pervasive that all of this is being carried out by women themselves. What we see in each of these examples is a state of self-policing that is amplified by an app like TikTok. This has of course been happening forever. In Ways of Seeing, John Berger, who I quoted earlier, examines the tradition of the female nude in European oil painting and considers the objecthood of the woman who poses for it. Of this he writes, "A woman must continually watch herself. She is almost continually accompanied by her own image of herself. While she is walking across a room, or while she is weeping at the death of her father, she can scarcely avoid envisaging herself walking or weeping. From earliest childhood, she has been taught and persuaded to survey herself continually, and so she comes to consider the surveyor and the surveyed within her as the two constituent yet always distinct elements of her identity as a woman. She has to survey everything she is and everything she does because how she appears to men is of crucial importance for what is normally thought of as the success of her life. Her own sense of being in herself is supplanted by a sense of being appreciated as herself by another. That women are watching and policing themselves and calling it feminism is the inevitable outcome of an app where spectatorship is the primary goal, where the most attention-grabbing sound bites are rewarded beyond measure. By defining themselves against men, by making this exclusive but self-aware club a club with girls and girl dinners and ultra-feminine clothing and aesthetics, TikTok feminists bring into stark clarity the personhood or essence that women lack in this contemporary world. Bigger noses during pregnancy make us less sexually viable to men. Women who are always nice are demure and more viable to men. Eating silly little dinners and being bad at math makes us thin and dumb and more viable to men. Cosmetic surgery obviously fucking makes us more viable to men. More viable to men, and therefore the market, which is determined by men. And this is the hegemonic form of feminism today. It's like post-feminism but without the choice. There is no choice in this mutation. You must adhere to these things or you will not be viable, not only to men, not only to the capitalist market economy, but to your fellow women, who writer father Karine aptly refers to on Substack as the nice girl Gestapo. It's a feminism that's all too aware of being watched, too aware of the pink acrylic middle finger it sticks up to patriarchy, its own carefully curated brand of capital F feminism, and is therefore not really feminism at all, now is it? But we know this, right? Reagan Lynch is kind of the apotheosis of this concept.
Day one of starting over my whole entire life.
Hi, I'm Reagan.
Lynch is a creator who garnered a massive following in a really short amount of time for making these super fast-paced vlogs about moving to London from the US after a really bad breakup. She scored points with viewers for talking on universal themes of heartbreak, making friends, the loneliness of living in a new city, and dating a new guy.
That could happen. He kissed me.
And while dithering about the guy, she'll also sprinkle in girl power-esque platitudes in videos that turn out to be advertisements.
Because at the beginning of all this, all I wanted was to know who I was outside of a relationship.
Like this one, which hilariously enough is an ad for Groupon. Lynch is like the culmination of the woman John Berger describes. She's taking this confessional art form of the vlog, where the person is speaking directly to their audience through the camera, and she makes it into this hyper-mediated cinema of the self, borrowing from the camera angles and portraiture of early 2000s rom-coms, even their soundtracks, and propping her camera up at every angle imaginable. With Lynch, we are no longer face-to-face with a vlogger, but a voyeur, a spectator, who's been tricked into this viewership by the angles and editing associated with narrative filmmaking. In other words, Lynch is watching herself being watched, play-acting her own life. Even the most unsavvy viewers should be able to clock the absurd manufacturedness of Lynch's videos. Like, her account seemed to have popped up out of nowhere, she's super vague about the actual details of her life despite being a lifestyle vlogger, and every video seems to follow the exact same formula. The lifestyle Lynch peddles is so hyper-mediated that she's never really accessible to us. Even her relationship to this guy is a cliffhanger, something always out of reach to her audience. It's to the point that some people have started to suspect the entire thing is made up. Yet, despite all this, Lynch is still wildly successful. We already know that girl power, going your own way feminism is lucrative, but there is something else here as well. What could it be?
For a minute there, I kind of forgot that I'm supposed to be building my life around me, not somebody else.
In comes the Vogue article. Since, according to the discourse, no one who disagrees with the article has read it, let's take a closer look, shall we? Joseph starts off by admitting that she mutes women who post about their boyfriends online. She writes, "There's nothing I hate more than following someone for fun, only for their content to become my boyfriendified suddenly." Then she points to the prevailing paradigm where women have been rewarded for their ability to keep a man, even leverage that for money on social media. But she says that she's noticed a recent shift in this posting behavior, where women are now posting subtler images of their partners, pictures of his hand, or in some cases, cropping or blurring his face altogether. She asks, so what gives? Are people embarrassed of their boyfriends now, or is something more complicated going on? For Joseph, she hypothesizes that women want the cachet of having a boyfriend without seeming like a loser for being too obsessed with their boyfriend. In other words, in an era of widespread heterofatalism, she writes, women don't want to be seen as being all about their man, but they also want the clout that comes with being partnered. To prove this point, Joseph interviews a small group of people, the majority of whom have social media followings, about their experiences with losing followers when hard launching their relationships. Like this woman who says, "There is something cringy and embarrassing about constantly posting your partner these days. There is a part of me that would also feel guilty for sharing my partner constantly, especially when we know the dating landscape is pretty shit at the moment. I wouldn't want to be boastful." Or another who remarks, "Being single gives you this ultimate freedom to say and do what you want. It is absolutely not every woman, but I do notice that we can become more beige and watered down online when in a relationship, myself included." Joseph also points to a podcast where the hosts ask whether it's lame to have a boyfriend now, whose comments read stuff like, "Why does having a boyfriend feel Republican?" and "Having a boyfriend typically takes hits on a woman's aura." From these observations, Joseph concludes that being partnered doesn't affirm your womanhood anymore. It is no longer considered an achievement, and if anything, it's become more of a flex to pronounce yourself single. She sees this as the dawn of a reevaluation, a politicization of heterosexuality, and ends off with an acknowledgement that there's no shame in falling in love, but having a boyfriend will continue to be a tenuous concept so long as we're rethinking heteronormativity. There are people who have noted that Joseph is a black woman and that she is speaking to a specific and implicit cultural context. I think this context should be acknowledged, but I do think that because the article doesn't discuss race and is published by Vogue, which is a company whose primary goal is to get you to buy clothes, that is very apparent from the headlines surrounding this article, there are more glaring and less subtextual aspects to this that do need to be discussed regardless. So going back to that original comment, there is no explicit reference to safety or gender-based violence or red pill or 4B or even decentering men. There is a slight subtext, like when the article quotes a listener of that podcast who says, boyfriends are out of style, they won't come back until they start acting right. But otherwise, it's kind of nada. What is very present in the article is something that was really striking to me. Pay attention to the verbiage. Style, content, followers, posting, aura. For me, as it was for Karine and Ali, the article seems less preoccupied with the real gender dynamics of the day than it does with the concept of boyfriends being bad for a woman's personal brand. If we are to place this within the context of feminism as we know it today, TikTok feminism, it's hard not to see this Vogue article as doing little more than getting women to police their own image. The sample group is insular, it's tiny and consists mostly of women who sell their own lifestyles. And because it's so focused on upwardly mobile, partnered influencers, and doesn't talk to actual single women or women who don't make money off social media, it really doesn't consider the lived reality of singledom at this day and age. Writer Shon Faye had this really beautiful response to the Vogue piece on Substack, where she talks about what it's really like to be a perpetually single woman in her mid to late 30s. And in it, she stresses just exactly how expensive and psychologically taxing it is to be single, not being able to split bills, having to self-soothe when you're no one's priority, how lonely it is because at a certain age, a lot of your friends are partnered up and busy with that. Many on the side of the single woman also push the idea of being able to embrace your career. But Faye says that she goes through phases of defining herself solely by her career until she realizes her career doesn't love her back. She says, and this is about the article, that it's so hard to hold in mind the ambivalent position that I am in a morally equal but socially stigmatized position compared to partnered people. It's easier sometimes psychologically to cope with the durational feeling of separation from others and fears of my inferiority by swinging to grandiosity. I am not separate because I am worse, I am separate because I am better. Vogue is putting forth that very grandiose message. And again, the article isn't actually about being single, it's about the image of being single. Just like the image of girl power or the image of being a girl's girl. It's not three-dimensional or even instructive. It's single, written in all caps, sans serif font. Joseph invokes the term heterofatalism, formerly known as heteropessimism, which was coined by a scholar named Ozza Saracen back in 2019. But this self-conscious branding of singledom is actually what Saracen is critiquing in their theory of heterofatalism, something that many people who bring this up forget to mention. Saracen defines heterofatalism as performative disaffiliations with heterosexuality, expressed through sentiments of regret, hopelessness, or embarrassment about being straight. Sometimes this is done by incels, most often it's done by women. Think that straight girl who says, "God, dating men sucks, I wish I was a lesbian like you." And Saracen says heterofatalism is performative because it's rarely accompanied by an actual abandonment of heterosexuality. Like I said, many of the women Joseph interviews for the article have boyfriends. They argue that heterofatalism does not bring people catharsis and instead has a tranquilizing effect, designed to preemptively anesthetize the heart against the pervasive awfulness of heterosexual culture, as well as the sharp plunge of quotidian romantic pain. In other words, it's cope. I've done it myself many times. And here's the part of Saracen's essay that no one ever talks about. They assert that heterofatalism is framed as taking an anti-capitalist stance, that in opting out of dating men, you're refusing the traditional values of the marriage market and property ownership. But Saracen points out how inaccessible that model of traditional life has become. And if the couple was the primary consumer unit of the past, today this has collapsed, or more accurately, been replaced by a new dyad, the individual consumer and her phone. Saracen writes, heteropessimism actually reinforces the privatizing function of heterosexuality, even as it is mass distributed through culture as a viral meme. Under a heteropessimistic rubric, women might not view themselves as competing with one another in the cutthroat dating market, but in metabolizing the problem of heterosexuality as a personal issue, the possibility of solidarity remains foreclosed. Does this remind you of anything? Conversations about the ways that women are denigrated in sexual relationships, or how the burden of child rearing is still shunted onto women, or the repealing of reproductive rights, or pay disparities, are all so prescient. But these online spaces, Vogue, TikTok, are not productive venues for these discussions because they have one objective only: to make money off of you. There's a scholar from King's College London named Alice Evans who recently released a study where she looks at different societies around the world and draws a positive correlation between gender equality and romantic love. Heterosexually speaking, of course. Because a society which values and encourages romantic love is a society comprised of men who view women as human beings, as equals, who have a vested interest in their success. Evans then has another study where she finds a negative correlation between gendered ideological polarization and social media. This goes for both South Korea and the West, where people are embroiled in online echo chambers. One of these is, of course, the far-right's men's movement, and the other, I would argue, is TikTok feminism. I'm sorry. With everyone being so wrapped into social media, there's a growing solitude among us all, and therefore a great distance between us, both physically and psychically. Evans reports that, especially in rich countries, people are spending less time with romantic partners, but also with other people as well. In fact, in the US, over half of 18 to 34-year-olds are neither in a steady relationship nor living with a partner, but they're not hanging out with friends or family or colleagues or helping out with their communities either. What they are doing is spending more and more time alone, at home, and on their smartphones. Evans concludes, men and women thus increasingly inhabit separate social worlds. As we spend less time with the opposite sex, we do not necessarily learn from their concerns or empathize with their perspectives. By blinkering ourselves to disagreement, we may become more confident in our priors. This breeds divergence. These trends in behavior are suggesting that the gulf is getting wider and wider. And I do think that on our side, women's side, media like the Vogue article or all these videos on TikTok are feeding this negative feedback loop of solitude masked as independence and self-reliance, which makes us perfect targets for the systems that are here to oppress us. The systems that feminism was railing against once upon a time. I live alone now. I have been more or less single for 3 years. I am also a feminist. And over the past several months, I've noticed that I'm able to go longer and longer stretches of being totally alone. My job is not a social one. Many of my friends work 9 to 5s, and I live in a city where it's totally socially acceptable to go to a restaurant all by yourself and have a meal. For a long time, I really valued this quality in myself. That is, my independence. Having been a kid who slept in her parents' bed well into her tweens, I'm proud of myself for working towards this state of being. But recently, I've become concerned with just how long I can go without needing any company. We're up to 4 days at this point. It's because I never really feel like I'm alone. I have a few group chats on the go where I regularly chat with my friends across the world. I FaceTime with my parents frequently. I go on social media and keep up with the Joneses, all the people who have flitted in and out of my life since middle school, many of whom I haven't seen in years. And this worries me because ultimately it's an illusion, a smokescreen of community. I am thousands of miles away from these people. I feel up to date with their lives, but those updates are missing the context that comes with physical presence, sharing a space with one another. I can't truly show up for these friends when they need me because I'm not really there. When I'm sitting in my living room and watching a movie totally alone, the only thing I actually have for company is that phone. It's to the point that I've had to throw it into my closet for periods of time to physically restrain myself from using it. Like a junkie, I find my hands twitching, I feel the heat of the phone from the other room bearing down on me. It's a genuine fucking addiction. And the more I'm alone, the more this has become a problem. The more I'm alone, I also find myself buying stuff for that quick rush of dopamine. Like, I am on Depop. Adam Curtis is a documentary filmmaker who uses BBC archive footage to draw connections between broad cultural events of the 20th and 21st centuries. Something he's picked out in several of his films now is the general trend away from collective action towards individualism, which Curtis argues, sometimes lucidly and sometimes kind of conspiratorially, was the intentional design of a few people in power. Like the example of Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, who Curtis suggests used radical individualism to violently transform the communist movement in China, or in the same series, a failed plane hijacking by leftist insurrectionists, which Curtis argues caused people to believe that radical change always led to violence and destruction, and that fascism and evil lay instead in the individual. Most interesting, or at least most lucid to me, is in Century of the Self, where Curtis talks about the ways that psychoanalysis was incorporated into the development of post-war America at the start of the 20th century, using the unconscious of the masses and their own emotions to sell products to them, to sell an image of the self, which Curtis argues cemented the creation of the American consumer, a being whose irrational desires, wants, take priority over their needs. Girl math, the illogical rationalizations women use to spend money on buying products like makeup or clothes instead of saving for more pressing needs like food, financial security, or housing, is this very idea manifest today. Curtis attributes much of this to Freud's American nephew, Edward Bernays, who played a covert but significant role in applying mass marketing strategies that played on individual irrational emotions to the shaping of American democracy. One of Bernays' earliest endeavors in the world of marketing was to recognize women, a previously overlooked group, as optimal consumers. He proved this by using the Freudian conception of pee-pee envy to portray the phallic instrument of the cigarette as a symbol for freedom. Torches of freedom, he called them. What Curtis takes away from this is that Bernays had created an idea that cigarettes made women more independent, a completely irrational and false assertion, but it proved that mere objects could become, with the right messaging, powerful emotional symbols for how people wanted to be seen by others, a notion completely inactionable, maybe even detrimental, that nonetheless resonated with people as that brand of individual empowerment. But this branded individualism is not good for actual political progress. Here's Curtis in Can't Get You Out of My Head.
Individualism and its drive to self-actualization can corrode and eat away at the collective power of mass democracy.
Decentering men is seductive when you're in the trenches of dating. So is going your own way like Elsa and Anna, which has been sold as the ultimate feminist act. The sharp plunge of quotidian romantic pain is already hard enough, let alone during this fraught political moment. But people were extrapolating a lot from the Vogue article that was never actually said. And one thing that was especially omitted was the suggestion for an alternative to dating, strengthening friendships, seeking out community, finding the Anna to your Elsa. Joseph recently came out with a follow-up article called 2025 was the year single women chose themselves, where she's candid about her experience with dating disinterested men and her recent choice to finally end a situationship with one. I felt this deeply. It feels really good to extract yourself from the battle to be picked and asking yourself what you actually want, what makes you feel good. It's something I myself struggle with. She references Rosalia and Lily Allen and Julia Fox and a few other anonymous women as taking part in a wider trend of voluntary singleness, and then finally acknowledges the need to invest in a village, outside of romance. I appreciate this more nuanced take and really empathize with Joseph's perspective, which likely informed that original piece. But then, perhaps to justify its existence on Vogue's website, the article follows up with a declaration that choosing yourself is the chic thing to do. It makes note that older women who have stayed child-free look great, and credits social media as the reason that so many women have chosen this way of life. Almost immediately after that article was published, a fashion creator came out with a video arguing that because singleness is back in, because Vogue said it is, fashion has become less about luxury and more about independence and power, and she uses images of suits and office wear on the runway to illustrate her point. When I told a friend about the boyfriend embarrassing discourse, they laughed and said, "Culture is not your friend." It's a quote from ethnobotanist Terence McKenna, who, among advocating for the therapeutic use of naturally occurring hallucinogens, felt, like Faludi, that mass culture was something designed to manipulate the individual in service of powerful institutions, something that sells an illusion of happiness, all the while eroding all the systems that make that happiness attainable.
Culture is not your friend. Culture is for other people's convenience and the convenience of various institutions. It insults you It disempowers you, it uses and abuses you. Yet we glorify, the creative potential of the individual, but the culture is a perversion. It fetishizes objects. It preaches endless forms of false happiness. It invites people to diminish themselves by behaving like machines.
While Joseph was clearly well-intentioned, the article's existence within Vogue is dubious. And while these ideas might resonate, I think it's important to question them. Fuck it. Question me too. The article's popularity online points to the increasingly palpable fact that the internet has become a fertile breeding ground for a brand of feminism that pairs far too easily with the project of capitalism. This new brand of feminism, or branded feminism, is the logical conclusion of a direction the women's rights movement has been evolving in for some time now. A direction away from collective solidarity, away from in-person meetings and support groups, from book clubs and in-depth discussions of feminist theories and politics and action, a deterioration seen as well in other leftist political movements that's been grossly accelerated by social media. It's the culmination of a decades-long project, both within and outside of feminism, where the individual triumphs over the collective. A torch of freedom passed from the likes of Bernays to the post-feminists, to Vogue, to the denizens of TikTok, and back to us. I know this video was a departure from my usual film content, but if you finish this and you find yourself yearning for movies again, Patrick Willems recently came out with a film of his very own. It's called The Dinner Plan, a movie about a guy who gets pressured into going to a dinner party at his boss's place, only to realize they're serving food that he's super allergic to. Patrick has described it as a Brian De Palma film, except the question is less, what if someone got murdered, and more what if someone vomits and ruins the party? The Dinner Plan is a sophisticated foray for Patrick into the world of filmmaking. It's got great visuals, and it stars an ensemble cast of some really amazing actors working today, including Zach Cherry from Severance, and it was all made possible by Nebula. Nebula is a streaming service that's creator-founded and creator-led, which means we're afforded a lot of creative control over the videos we make. It's a really varied platform where you can get broad cultural commentary like this video, and videos about more focused topics as well. So right now you can watch a full-blown movie like The Dinner Plan, which was produced by Nebula, a whole bunch of original series like my very own called Taboo on Screen, as well as all my past videos ad-free. You can even watch Nebula videos offline with their app. If you're interested in watching some really amazing original content, you can sign up using the link below, and you can support me directly and get Nebula for a 40% off annual plans. Then there's lifetime memberships, which cost $500, $300 if you use my link, and last you forever. Just you, me, and eternity, baby. Go do it, you won't regret it. So go to nebula.tv/broedationl or click the link in the description for 40% off right now.
Special thank you to Syed Hassan, Mel Pertwee, Morgan, Cooper Stimson, Nadia C., Nick, Jenny Eller, J. Frost McFinnigan, Gabriel M., The Wiz Daniel, Edward Yu, Andrew Nguyen, Carolyn Stowe, Basil Ann, Connor O'Keefe, Gavin Borden, Sharma, Smith, Daniel Sardunas, Jenya, The Double Chip, Ryan Blythe, Lady Diane, Laterre Roulon, Jin's Scream and Dionysus, Maya Kamaeva, Natalie Popper, Naomi Nakagawa, Burrow Fiddle, Lauren Woodring, Susie, Nathan King, Elena, Scott Barnett, William Elderfield, Julia Campana, Mr. Allen, Travis Honey, Andre Modeste, Luis Eduardo Taroba, Jay, Marwan, Sean Purnell, Danny Hall, Alexis, Navis Bullock, Carrie Gavin, RSS, Thomas Dillon, Fridtjof Hallstrom, Alex Short, and Kelly Wolf for supporting this channel.